Hi, Lawrence. It's been a while now. So I've been asking, I know we've been talking about it as well, about getting you on to one of these fireside chats. And to be honest with you, one of the main reasons behind that is that I know that, you and Joanne have been sort of in the market for a long time, in the EdTech market. I've worked with you and I think we've known each other for probably about 18 odd years now, which is a long time. You're one of the sort of true entrepreneurs, I'd argue, of EdTech, from the very beginning. You came out with probably the first messaging solution, so a group called Messenger, which was, how many years ago is that now?
About 20, actually, yeah.
20 years ago. And actually, when you look at your journey as well, it's actually interesting because everything sort of fits in as well, because obviously you had to pull out data from the MIS. So the next thing you did after looking at a group called Messenger, it's all almost, it's basically just a natural progression to then start looking at group call exporter, which then sucked the data out of the MIS. But then what you were doing is offering it, much cheaper, I guess, in the sense of to the wider third party sort of community, or making it cheaper for them anyway, rather than having to deal with multiple MISs and having to deal with multiple APIs. They could go directly to group called Messenger. And then once you have the data, the natural progression there is to sort of go, well, actually, can we identify some more insights into this data that no one else is doing at the moment? And you had a group called Vault. So you sell that to community brands. And then you now started looking at other sort of options to sort of support schools. So you're involved in GDPR IS, so GDPR in schools. And also more recently, you started up with teamSOS as well. Now that so you've been involved in lots of different ventures, as it were, but actually some of those, like I say, seem quite natural progressions. Do you think that's the sort of thing that normally entrepreneurs do? Is that part of what entrepreneurial sort of mindset is?
I think it's the progression of things for sure. When we did Messenger, I was at a meeting in Redbridge, actually, in a local authority, and I was there to present Messenger. And while I was in that meeting with various schools, someone put their hand up and was talking about, can you please send the data, Doris, every, you always miss it, and can you send it on, make sure you send it on the third Thursday of every month. And this was all the schools were there. And I was there, obviously, with Messenger, and we knew where the data was. And so I sort of put my hand up and said, we could probably help with this, right? And that's literally how Exporter started for Group Call. I think on being an entrepreneur, it is about seeing opportunities and acting on them. And lots of people have ideas, right? Everybody has ideas, actually. Everybody has ideas.
True.
There's a smaller set of people that will act on them and really put their money where their mouth is and try and do something about it. And I think my buzz is making things, right? It is making things, right? It's having an idea that you see something and you think, I could do something with that. I could make it better and make it commercial.
Yeah, but I do think there is. So I agree with you 100%. But I think that sort of entrepreneur mindset is. I remember watching a Darren Brown sort of type of program where I think they put a lottery ticket on the floor which had was worth £10,000, whatever. But most people walked past. But there was the odd person who was almost looking for that next opportunity. And I think that is the mindset which obviously you and Joanna have, for sure. So I think that I agree. You definitely need to action it. There's no point having an idea and then saying, I can't believe I could have made thousands out of that if you haven't actioned it. But I think there is also that mindset. I think you are somebody who looks, well, you obviously have, because you, as you just said, people are throwing opportunity at you and you are taking it. And, and I think some people just don't even see it, even when it's being thrown at them.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody knows someone who's looking for that. You see it in somebody, right? You see it in somebody. You see someone's hungry to do something, wants to do something. I think you shouldn't always. It's not about doing it for the sake of doing it, right? Not like taking something on a, some other sort of something that works on paper and putting it on a computer because for that sake, right? Which people do, right, wrongly, right, you've got to see that it makes it better, right? But it absolutely is I don't actually have a hobby, right? So I don't play golf, and I don't do football, and all of those things, right? My hobby is this, right?
Yeah.
You know, I like to make things and with a computer, really. You know, it's kind of what they used to call inventing, right? You know, someone was an inventor years ago. It meant different things to what it is nowadays, but actually that's what we're doing. We're making things.
Yeah, no, I agree, and you know, and obviously being very successful at doing so. And I think, you know, and I agree also what you just said. It has to meet a need. So you know, you're trying to solve somebody's pain point, really.
Yeah.
Now,
Sure.
one of the other things, absolutely, you know, we just talked about Joanna. So Joanna is your partner in crime, which I appreciate she's not here today, but you know, I you know, as important as yourself within your business.
More
Same
than.
with,
Yeah.
pardon?
More than.
More than. The same
Yeah.
with me. So you know, Sarah works very closely in the business, and you know, and to be honest with you, I know we were talking off camera about the fact that basically that, you know, they are almost, you know, like you say, far more important because they basically stop you from doing the silly things.
Absolutely.
So how you know, what's it like? Tell me from your perspective, what's it like working with your wife? And you know,
Well, Joe and I mean, we've been married for 31 years, and
wow.
we've worked together. We actually started working together before we were married, even though we were a couple already. And we was in a little office where I was in one room, she was in the other room, and there was a glass wall with a hole in it, right? And we were on the, you know, just there on either side of that. And so that's how it started for us. Obviously we had our children, and then we had another business before Group Call, which we built and sold successfully, a software business.
Okay.
And then there was Group Call, and so we've worked together in all of the things that we do over all of the years. And Jan is we've got a very you know, we've got skills which are very symbiotic, and it all works well together. And she completely you know, it all works for us together. You know, I think it's important actually when you have a husband and wife type setup that you know, there are, you know, you can leave it all at work when you go home. Yeah. I'm sure you know the same exactly.
Absolutely.
Right. But equally, when we set up Group Call and during bedtimes, I remember sitting in my lounge with Joanne and the kids, stuffing brochures the night before. You know, that's what you know, as we evolved from, Group Call grew organically. And so there wasn't any outside investment or anything like that. And so we did it all ourselves from very humble beginnings. And as we, you know, the kids knew how many clients we had, yeah, and how many schools we had. And you know, everyone was involved in even on those early bets. My kids, who were old enough by that point to be there, came along and helped, right? So it was a family business actually. But working together with your wife, I think she completely grounds me. I'm sure that we would never have been successful if it wasn't for her.
Yeah, well, I'm totally agreement with you, as we've discussed. I think one of the questions that always gets asked, and I'm going to ask you, and then I'll also comment on it by all means. But you know, there's always a case of, you know, surely you must argue. You know, it's always that old-fashioned sort of where you must argue about things, and you know, how do you get through that? You know, does it bleed into your day-to-day sort of life?
I think that it's not healthy if you don't argue. I mean, you know, I think that's just part of life, right? It's just, you know, when you're very close with somebody, you know, you'll agree, you won't agree. I mean, and you compromise. That's actually what partnership is all about. It's actually about compromise. And sometimes Jan wins, sometimes I win, and sometimes we just agree to disagree, right?
Yep.
But as long as you're strong enough, then these things, nothing's too big. Nothing's too big to get in your way that affects everything else.
I think there's also an element. So one, I don't think it really does bleed into the day to day. So if anyone is watching this and wanting to know what it's like, I don't think it does bleed into the day to day. I think, you definitely have these sort of disagreements, and you're right. I think there is a lot of times you have to compromise, which actually turns out to be the right decision anyway. There's a little bit about what you want, there's a little bit about what Joanna wants or Sarah wants in my pet case. Where you sort of go, actually, that is the right place to be. So sometimes you need that friction, I think, to get to the right answer.
For sure. There's, excuse me, it is working together and figuring out something, and you ultimately get to the right destination.
Yeah, I agree. Oh man, amazing. So, as I said before, you've obviously sold, your group called business. You've been helping and supporting with the GDPR-IS business, but you've now just started up. Well, not just started, actually. It's been there in the making for a little while. But you've now brought into market the product teamSOS, and I think it's quite interesting because some of it's about coming back to that entrepreneurial understanding when's the right time. So, do you think that sort of type of solution is now needed more in relation to supporting and sort of securing and supporting teachers and staff within the school, or do you think it's something that's needed to be there for a while, but the technology hasn't been right?
Combination of those things, really.
Okay.
The stress on teachers now has been enormous. Especially the go back to school, the whole COVID thing. There's been, working, this hybrid learning, and all of those things, right? The demands on teachers has been enormous, and they've done an amazing job. I take my hat off to all of them, actually. But, that going back to a classroom and feeling, you need to be supported, right? And, in all of this because of the high levels of stress and the difficulties that everybody's faced. And mental health stuff and all of those things, right? And so teamSOS is a thing which helps teachers feel supported, right? It makes them feel like they're not alone. And so it wasn't, when we decided to do it, we obviously didn't know anything about COVID. It was 2 years ago, or more than 2 years ago, that we actually started doing it and developing it. And so obviously there wasn't any COVID then. And I think that it really is that fundamental sort of support for teachers was the timing thing, as they now, so it is needed now in that respect. In many of the other things, it does, some of the things come out of thoughts that I've had from years ago, right? Where the call for help, this idea that you could just push a button or do something and get someone to come along and help you.
Yeah.
And then the idea of well, how do I do that? Well, or do I use my walkie-talkie? And then you think about walkie-talkies, right? And you think, well, hold on a minute, this technology is like ancient, right? And when I go in the when you used to go in a mini cab and you do the radio coming and all of those things that are happening and whatever, and you think actually many schools use walkie-talkies right now. Actually, most schools use walkie-talkies right now, and that's sometimes how they call for help in special needs schools, very much so. And so there's like a hodgepodge of things. Some of it, was things from old, right, and then some of the things was like needs from now, right, which you put all together in your sort of technology sort of melting pot, and you come out with this idea for something, right, whereas you think you can do it better, and teamSOS was born out of all of these things. So it is, yes, it's now, and it was also in the past, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember having maybe with you actually about that sort of alert button sort of type of idea. You do want something immediate because the joke part of it is you don't want to have something which takes a long time because you're not going to turn around to the kids who are fighting in in the classroom and say, can you stop for a second while I record this, please?
Yeah.
You can carry on in a minute, but I just need to understand what your names are.
Absolutely.
So you need something quite immediate. So I'm guessing, that the technology is supporting that as much as anything else.
Very much so. It's running on whatever the teachers have available, phones, tablets, Windows PCs, Chromebooks, whatever it happens to be, or even things like this, which is like a little emergency button you can just click and it calls for help. But the idea that you can literally make a tap, but what's more important than calling for help is actually giving a bit of information, right? So in 2 clicks in teamSOS, you say I want help, and it's this type of help, right? Because we allocate different teams depending on the type of help you need. So if it was, for example, a medical incident, you go to the medical team, and if it was a safeguarding incident, behavioural incident, it could go to different groups of people, right?
Okay.
And because you give a bit of information, it becomes so much better to the people who have to respond, because they can triage and they can judge what is the thing I need to go to first, right? And you don't get that, right? At the moment in some MIS products, you might have an emergency button, and all it does is send an email to somebody. And it's how they do it at the moment, right? Is how do they do? Schools do it at the moment. They do that, right? Or they send a student, which is really what you shouldn't do, right? Because they become party to it as well, right? And then there's pressure on them and all sorts of things like that, right? And sometimes people have monitor a mailbox and then go on a walkie-talkie and get hold of the on-call member of staff, and when you get hold of them and they finally come, right, but time has passed, and all of those things mean that we've actually seen a really amazing response from teachers who realize that they can push a button and get someone really quickly, and they know that someone's coming, right? And they know that the person knows what they're coming to. Sometimes they actually don't come to the classroom, right? Because sometimes they make this call for help and they can communicate subtly to get guidance, because sometimes you don't want the teacher doesn't want their authority to be affected by coming in to help them, right? And they can actually be told, well, this is what I would do in this situation. This is a school policy in this situation, very sort of quietly on their device, without anyone really knowing that they're actually getting some guidance and some help, right? That's quite interesting as well. And we've seen all sorts of interesting feedback in our case studies on this, about the fact that in some schools they actually using it as a coaching thing, and so on. And in other schools, the students know that this new thing's in place, right? And actually the teachers are right on it, right? In some classes, they actually make incident types for students who skip lessons, right? And so they actually raise an incident, right, to do with this particular student that's known to skip lessons, and it stopped it, right? Because everyone knows, right? And the student knows that the school's right on it, and it's made actual lesson attendance much better in places where, or for particular students where it's become an issue. Anyway, so it was a long answer to those.
No. And I'll tell you what, that's also really relevant based on what Dame Rachel D'Souza just put out as regarding attendance. So actually, it's very relevant indeed. Do you know what? The thing is that it's like all solutions. Some things sound more simple than they are. So as you've already explained that, one, you can already see the benefit from, especially a new teacher, a new qualified teacher who, you're right, who doesn't understand all the policies, or even the way they might have to interact with, with bullying incidents, or some of those which, to be honest with you, would be quite scary, I should imagine, for a new teacher. You're about to go into a situation where, are you handling it right? Is it going to go to appeal? If it goes to appeal, have you got to the point where you've handled it so badly that it, that basically, you get a warning or whatever it might be. So I think that, that actually, there's far more in this than what it would potentially be seen as it's just a quick alert. So I think it is quite an interesting thing. Are there things then that you've learned on the way where you've gone, actually, do you know what, we put this into place, but there's so many different exceptions and different scenarios of alert or communication in this particular way, that actually we need to do some other things that we've never anticipated?
Sure. I think anyone who delivers a product who's not awake to the possibility that it could actually change along the sort of journey, especially in the early days, is not going to deliver. Actually, it's not going to get anywhere. The original thought here was, you know, an alerting system. It actually started out to be quite an emergency alerting system. And then we put it into some schools, and they actually fed back to us and said, you know, actually, we'd like to do more operational things, not just about emergencies. You know, you talk about medical emergencies, and we put in things to do with all of that, right? To do with, you know, first aid videos and things like that, you know, that you could see what to do in case of an emergency, which was great. But they said, well, actually, we want behavioural things, and we want operational things. You know, if the projector doesn't work, or if, you know, we just want students playing up and we want to get them out of the class, or, you know, those sorts of things. And so we added that, and then still, you know, still made it easy. So people could, now that there was a whole range of things, you could choose what to do first, because the triage idea of the product, which it really does. And then we started taking in suggestions, right, from schools, and especially primary schools in this case. They said, well, you know, we're communicating here, but, you know, in the case of an emergency, but actually one of the emergencies we have is things like fire drills and things, right, and real fires, right, which happen in, unfortunately, a much higher number of schools than people really think, right? And in the case of a real fire, what happens? The fire bell goes off and everyone looks at each other. Right, it's like, it doesn't matter, actually, it's not only schools, right, it's everywhere. And everyone looks at each other and says, is it real? Where is it? You know, should I do anything, or should I just carry, you know, it's like that sort of thing. And we decided to put an announcement capability into teamSOS as a result of this, whereas we could actually announce to all the members of staff, yes, this is a fire, right, but it's under control, and just evacuate normally, but please check in, because they actually wanted to know not just about the fact that everyone's had it, but they wanted to know that everyone was all right, right? Yeah. In a real situation, right? Because you just don't have that, right? And so, excuse me, we put in the capability that when you send this out, I mean, you could send that by email, right? You could have done that by email, sort of thing, right? To quickly, something, right? But actually, what we needed was actually more than that. We wanted people to say, I'm okay, I'm not okay. Or actually that we didn't respond, and we gave them like this little dashboard which updates in real time, which says all the people who are okay, all the people who are not okay, right? And of course, then you can communicate with those people who are not okay, and you know, right? And it's very all grouped together in one place, right? It's not in me in emails or me in Teams messages, and you're in charge. It's very easy to do that. And so we did that for things like fire drills, but people have been using it for Ofsted inspections as well. Ofsted are here, Ofsted are here.
Action stations.
Absolutely right. Shouldn't have said that, but anyway. So that evolved, and then the other places where it became really interesting is that people said to us, well, you know, you're good in the sense of we're catering for something that happens. Right, we're acting out our policy, we're dealing with something, and we're evidencing it, because that's what teamSOS does, really. It grabs evidence. I'll talk about that maybe afterwards a bit more or whatever, because it's a really interesting part. But in terms of the product, we were dealing with the situation, whatever it is, you know, whether it's medical or behavioural or one of those particular things. But what we weren't doing was telling people how to prepare for those things. Yeah. And so we didn't have that in the product at the time, and people said they'd like to have more guidance, you know, to know what to do in a certain situation. And we added, and we have now added, these guidance packs, which we are, you know, on things like GDPR and safeguarding and online safety and cyber security and things like that, where these from the best of breed organizations actually have policies and videos and various things in the product that that staff can look at and, you know what to do in the event of a certain circumstance. And actually that expanded, really to answer your last point, that expanded so schools can now put in their policies as well. So policy videos, basically the stuff to run the school that you give to the staff. teamSOS manages that, shows it to them staff. They can look at it in the palm of their hand, sort of bite-sized policy, if you like, right? And from that, the school can see that they've actually looked at it. And then when something comes to, when they have to act upon it, that's when the product picks up, right? So the product picks up. So you've now got policies that are actionable. And then so one of those policies happens, whether it's a safeguarding or something, anything like that. You use the product to evidence whatever you did and whatever happened, right? And then finally that gets exported into like a sitcom to a concern. So it's like a life cycle of an incident. And we learned that from speaking to schools. Now that wasn't in the plan, right? It wasn't in the plan, right? But we, you know, and that wasn't the original product at all. But from working with schools and talking to them and really listening, there's a theme which some people who will watch this will know what it means, called product market fit.
Yeah.
Right? Which is sort of a computery technical term for people who make products to say that your product is right for your audience, right? And I actually never knew what that was, you know, because you always used to go with your gut, right? You know, years ago, you know, you used to go with something, make up something and then and try and sell it to people. But in reality, it is the process of really engaging very closely with your audience, right? And with schools in our case, and listening, right? And then refining and then listening again. And that's what we've done. And I think that's very important for anybody who wants to make a product for any audience. They just have to keep listening and keep refining. There's a term that someone used with me, which I have never forgotten, called successive approximation, right? Yeah, which is, you know, trying to get there.
Yeah, and you know, I love, you know, the approach that you've taken, because, you know, I think the one thing you miss if you don't do the listening piece is, I tell you what, is what resonated was very much when you saw when, you know, the fire alarm goes off and people don't really know what to do, and actually what you're giving them is reassurance. Because you know, well, I remember in Capital when the alarm went off, you saw when you looked at each other and went, is this really a real one? Is this, you know, should we bother? Should we take our coats and should we take everything with us this time? You know, I know we're not supposed to, but does it really matter? Is it urgent? Is it not urgent? You know, all those questions go in your head because you're optimistic. You know, I think most humans are optimistic, so they're sort of going, it's just a drill. It's not that important. But actually, you need sometimes that reassurance to say, this is really important, and actually, can you make sure everyone evacuates in the orderly fashion? Or, you know, it's in this part of the building, you know, we're okay, we've got it under control, and actually, but we still would like you to go out, and we would still like you to, you know, make sure that you feed back, as you say, that everyone's all right and no one's missing. So I think, you know, actually it sort of gives that sort of soft, you know, it'd be hard to understand the soft requirement there, you know, unless you spoke to the schools or understood exactly how people were acting within schools. So you do need to sort of almost immerse yourself in what they're doing and understand the environment they're in, you know, what else is happening, you know, and all those sort of things. So I think that's really important for people to understand, that listening, as you said, to your customer, but really truly listening, not just sort of giving it a bit of a courtesy. I think it is really, really important. I think that's really, really strong, actually.
And I mean, we have literally, it's been a year, right? It has been a year of listening, right? And developing, right? Because we put the product out and we put it in some test schools, and then we sold some subscriptions as well, and all of that feedback has just gone in and kept going in and refining. And so I suppose if there was a message to anyone, it might be to say, don't rush, right? Don't rush. And because you know, it always takes twice as long and costs twice as much, right? If you know, for anyone who knows who's watching or not, I'm talking about, right? But don't rush, because you really need to. If you get it wrong, you waste everything
and destroy your brand. Yeah, because people don't really look twice, do they? They don't. You know, it's not a case of they go, oh, they haven't got it there yet. Well, we'll come back to them. Normally, it's a case of actually there must be something else out there instead, or they just forget about it. So I agree. I think making sure you get it right first time is really, really important. But you can only do that by gathering the feedback from your customer base, listen to them, and everything else. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, really good advice.